Hello, and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism through passionate people doing incredible things. Hi, I'm watching my favorite love story for film this week, Ever After. I almost forgot it
Mm.
there for a second. Starring Drew Barrymore. I love that movie, and
That was great.
I am joined by my co-host, whose favorite movie is either, because she hasn't told me which one it is, The Princess Bride, or Shakespeare in Love. Or as she liked to put it, what was it? The Princess Shakespeare Bride in Love.
Yes,
Mm.
I am Princess Shakespeare Bride in Love.
Accurate. Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hello. I would say all of the above
Really?
is my favorite, but including Ever After. I have lots of favorites. That's very difficult to choose.
It is. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is about Ever After, but that just does it for me.
The costumes are good too.
Oh, let's not get started on costumes because we will be here all day long.
Forever. The Oscars are coming. We should probably have this conversation at some point soon.
Mhm.
Yes. Oh, well, I am excited to have our guest today because we have a returning guest in honor of Valentine's Day coming up later this week.
Yes, we do.
If you are listening to this in the future, then please enjoy some fantastic tales. But Emily, would you introduce our returning guest today?
I would. And I just want to point out that Valentine's Day is every day if you're doing it right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's fair. I accept
So,
that.
but today we have storyteller Laura Packer with us, who is an award-winning, super awesome, really great friend of the show, known for her books and story seeds cards, and just all around awesomeness. Welcome to the show, Laura Packer.
I'm so happy to be here. I love hanging out with you. And some of my favorite movies are The Princess Bride, love story movies. The Princess Bride and The Lion in Winter, which is a little
Ooh.
bit atypical love story,
Mhm.
and LA Story and Stranger Than Fiction. I love all of those movies and would watch them over and over and over again.
I feel like A Lion in Winter has really, going back to the costuming aspect, has
Mm.
really good costumes, like wintry costumes at the beginning.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
It has great, and it's also, strictly speaking, it's a Christmas movie, but that's okay.
So is Die Hard. So
Are you going to throw me out of this podcast? Just got-
that was great. I love that.
Are you going to throw me out of this podcast if I say that I haven't seen A Lion in Winter?
No.
Mm. You should though.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a much more pointed. It's a very pointy movie. It's you've got a lot of prickles, but it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, it's probably not one that even everybody's heard of. It's not like as popular as Princess. Nothing's as
Yeah.
popular as Princess Bride, but like you can still find it out there. I'm sure. It's been a while
Mhm.
since I've seen it. Maybe
Yeah.
that's our homework for this week: is everybody go watch Lion in Winter.
Yeah, it's got Katharine Hepburn as Eleanor of Aquitaine and Richard Burton as Henry the First or Second. I don't remember. I should know. But it's amazing. It's amazing.
well, I'm convinced.
Very young Patrick Stewart,
Yes.
and a very young Timothy Dalton, and a
Really?
very young Anthony Hopkins.
All of which I enjoy as actors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to
Kind of
see
a
it.
blast from the past. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
you're good. I just, as soon as you said Patrick Stewart, I was like, yes, done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Easy. Easy. Yes. So, speaking of great stories, Laura has come prepared today to share a few things with us, and I'm going to let you just sort of have at it.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I have for you some love stories and some love folklore, and a
Okay.
few thoughts about the origins of Valentine's Day, if you want that
Oh,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with that, since this whole episode was inspired by Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day now, as you know, is this pretty commercial holiday, but it's also a chance to tell the people you love that you love them. Well, it started out of Lupercalia, which was a Roman holiday honoring Faunus, the god of love and fertility. So it's a lot about what love can lead to, ideally, and having good outcomes there, preferred outcomes there. He was a god of agriculture, of fertility, of making things grow. So when Lupercalia came around, there were big celebrations and sacrifices. Um, well, it was then followed by a matchmaking lottery where young men and young women would pair off and do the things that you do and maybe end up getting married afterwards. So that's where it all started. But in the 3rd century, there was a fellow named Valentine who later became Saint Valentine, and he was known for helping people get married in secret. The Emperor of Rome had declared that anyone who was in the army, all the men in the army, could not marry. So he did these secret wet marriages for them because he was promoting love and connection and community. And he eventually fell in love with the daughter of a jailer who was managing the jail where these people who got married when they were found out were kept. And he wrote her this love note not long before he died that was signed, "Your Valentine." And it's believed that that's where the whole Valentine thing comes from. Well, Valentine, his saintly veneration day is February 14th, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time of Chaucer, Valentine's Day was a thing. And Chaucer actually wrote a poem. Let me see if I can find the quote. About when a fowl chooseth its mate, which got the whole idea of celebrating romantic love going on Valentine's Day, which I think is really fun. I'm looking at my notes. Pardon me for looking away. So Saint Valentine is this patron saint of lovers, men and women, and other people who love each other, of beekeeping, Emily, of epilepsy, of the plague, of fainting, and of travel, which I think is a really interesting set of things that you could probably weave a pretty cool story from. The oldest Valentine known that's left is from 1415. And it was from the Duke of Orleans when he was imprisoned in the Tower of London. And it was a letter that was sent to his beloved. And so Valentine's Day has just grown. Now about 145 million Valentine's Day cards are sent through the mail every year. And that's not
Wow.
electronic cards. There are also sour Valentines called vinegar Valentines that came about during the Victorian era, which are nasty, angry Valentines. One of them said, "To my Valentine, 'tis a lemon that I hand you and bid you now skidoo."
Okay, I kind of love this.
I do too. I do too.
What?
There's another depicts a woman dousing an unsuspecting man with a bucket of water, and the text said, "Here's a cool reception." So I kind of think we need to make vinegar Valentines a thing again. Internet trolls kind of do that, but wouldn't it be more fun coming up with stuff like that and sending it in? It's a nicer rejection than doxing someone or something like that. So
And
I
it's
think
kind of
those are,
funny. Like to
yeah,
send it to somebody that even like you actually do love or that you actually would just play a prank on or
yeah.
be silly with. That
Oh yeah.
sounds fabulous.
I could see sending those to my friends and them sending them to me and it just being a really fun giggle. So Valentine's Day has this long, storied history. So if you want to see your true love, you should take a sprig of rosemary, and rosemary is an herb associated with memory, and a sprig of thyme, which is an herb that's supposed to give you visions, and sprinkle them with water, dribble some water on it, and then put the herbs in your shoe and put your shoes at the foot of your bed, and you're going to dream of your true love.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Isn't that
basically
fun?
just take like your Italian blend seasoning,
Yeah, and put it in your shoes, and
throw it in your
there's
shoes.
a little basil in there. That's okay. That's good
Yeah.
too. Yeah. So, when I was little, the one that I learned from my family was if you have an apple and you turn the stem. Did either of you do that? You count the
Mhm.
letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, and when the
No.
stem breaks off, that letter is the first initial of your beloved, of the person you'll marry. So it
That's
was When I was a kid,
Wow.
I always tried to make it break off where my crushes were, but I gotta tell you, it's been a long time since I've been a kid, and I've now had 2 very happy marriages. I still twist the stem and count the letters. So, yeah, A, B, C, D. So,
Fair.
yeah. Yeah, the Apple thing is really fun. I can see that Josh did the Apple thing, and hi, Kaz.
Oh.
Nice night. I'm glad you're here. Um, so, yes, there's all kinds of love folklore and ways to see your true love and ways to get rid of the wrong love. And it's across every culture. Every culture has love stories, has deities who are devoted to romantic love, um, deities who are the ones you pray to if you want to get rid of somebody. It is such a basic part of human experience. There are academics who will say, well, romantic love wasn't really a thing until the Victorian era, but that's not true at all. We've been falling in love forever, as long as we've been human and probably before, because that's what we do. It feels really good. Why wouldn't we fall in love? So I have some stories. Do you want a story? Do you have any questions about this stuff that I've been saying?
No, no questions from me. I'm ready for a story.
I have a question. Trey, did you ever do the Apple thing?
No, actually. I would
No?
imagine that it would, surprisingly, and little fact about me, most of my crushes throughout my life, or the people that I have fallen for, have
Hmm.
started with the letter J.
Huh. It's
Hmm.
hard to get it to Jay.
I anyway, we could
When
be
I
on
was
a
married, when I
tangent.
was married to Kevin with a K, whom I
Mhm.
adored, he died. I still love him. I would turn the stem. I could never get it to get to K. I really kept trying over and over again. You can also peel an apple, and if you can get the peel off in one long continuous strip, if you throw it over your shoulder, it's supposed to form the name of your beloved. I have tried it over and over, and it just makes a mess. But maybe you'll have better luck than I.
I I I'm intrigued by this. Between the rosemary, because I've got some rosemary in the kitchen,
Hmm.
um, and then I haven't bought any apples recently, but yeah, I'll be intrigued.
Yeah.
I wonder if it depends on the type of apple. Like there may be more robust apples that would have a stem that's a little difficult because if someone's last name or someone's name is like Xavier, that that's a tough one. You're gonna have
Mhm.
to get a really robust apple to like be able to, or you're just very weakly, you
Or your
know.
feet. Yeah, you just don't turn it very much. A,
Right.
B, C, D. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Cheat. Also, when this folklore was coming out, when this folklore was popular, they were different apples than what we have now. The apples we have now probably are bred to have weaker stems, so you can harvest them more easily.
Probably in general, and also like um depending on location, like
Yeah.
different places of the world grow different apples, or
Yep.
not at all.
Yep.
Kaz in the chat said, "My hubs says I bewitched him, cast a spell on him," and I'm like, "Frog blink, what now?"
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Love that. All right, let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
Okay.
This story is a Scottish story. It comes from a ballad that we know existed at least back in the 1600s. I love this story. Janet was a fiery girl. She had bright eyes and red hair, and even as a child, Janet knew what she wanted. She knew what she wanted for dinner. She knew what she wanted to play, how she wanted to play. She knew what she wanted to wear. And she knew that she wanted Tamlin, the son of one of her neighbors. And she and Tamlin played together when they were children, but when they were 12, and when she was 12 and Tamlin was 14, he vanished. No one knew where he was. Some people said that he had run away and was trying to make his fortune. Other people said that, well, he must have just gone out for a walk one day and fallen down and, well. And some people said that they heard he'd been stolen by the Queen of the Fairies because he was a handsome young man. Well, Janet looked for Tamlin, and she searched for him, and then she mourned him and thought that he was gone. When Janet was 21, she took to taking long walks on her family's land. Her heart had never really healed from the loss of Tamlin, and so she would wander around the land, usually at night, dreaming about what might happen if Tamlin came back to her. She was down on the banks of the river, the Cotter Hall River, and she was looking across at the mist on the water. There were roses that grew by the riverside, and she plucked a rose and smelled its sweet fragrance when she heard a voice behind her saying, "Who are you to have picked my roses?" She turned around. In the dark, in the fog, she could not tell who it was, a tall man, and she said, "These are my family's roses. I can pick them if I want." And the man took another step towards her and said, "No, they belong to the Fairy Queen, and I belong to her." And then the mist cleared just a little bit. And there he was, Tamlin, tall and grown, but she would always recognize him. The two stared at each other for a long moment, and then I can only imagine flew into each other's arms. Some time passed that we will pass over in this story. And then there they were, lying on the banks of the river, wrapped in Janet's long green cloak. And Janet said, "Tamlin, what happened to you?" And he explained that the Fairy Queen had taken a liking to him, so she had stolen him away, and he must never come back to human life again. And Janet felt her heart crumple all over again. "But I can meet you here, Janet. We can meet here, we can talk, we can lie with each other, and all will be well. I promise you, all will be well as long as the Fairy Queen doesn't find out." And so they did. They met there night after night after night. The summer was drawing to a close. The cool air was creeping in. The nights were growing colder, and Janet arrived to greet Tamlin, and he wasn't there, nor the next night, nor the next. Her family worried about her. She was going down to the river all alone, staying there all night long. What would happen to her? What was wrong with her? Surely she was going mad, or maybe there was another problem. Her maid had noticed that Janet was letting out her dresses around the waist and just below. And finally, one night, she was down at the banks of the river and Tamlin wasn't there, and she called out, "Tamlin, how can you leave me again? What will you do now that there is a babe on the way?" And the fog parted, and Tamlin stepped out. And he said, Janet, I'm so sorry. The Queen was beginning to worry, and I was afraid she would hurt you. And oh, there is a babe on the way." And his face broke into a smile, but his cheeks were wet with tears. He wrapped his arms around her. "Janet, the Fairy Queen every 7 years must give a sacrifice on Halloween night. She must let one of us go, and we will be gone forever down to hell. And oh, Janet, she has picked me. I am so sorry, my love. I am so sorry." And they wept. And then Janet dried her tears, and because she was a girl who got things done, she said, "Well, there must be something that I can do. I will not let the Fairy Queen send you down to hell." And Tamlin said, "Well, there is, but I do not know, Janet. It will put you at great risk." Janet looked at him. "Tamlin, when we were children, who climbed higher in the tree?" "You did, Janet." "And when we were children, who was it that would always go out into the deepest part of the river while you stayed on the bank?" "It was you, Janet." "And Tamlin, do you think that now I would be a coward and let you go to hell and at least not fight for you?" "No, Janet," he said. And he told her what he must do, what she must do. "You must be here at midnight," he said. "You must be here at midnight, and you must hide, and you will see a group of riders on black horses go by, dressed all in black. Stay hidden as best you can, because the Fairy Queen is in that retinue, and if she sees you, oh, Janet, you will not survive her glance. and wait. Then you will see riders dressed in brown on brown horses ride by, and let them go by as well. Those are her servants and her lords. And then you will see riders in white on white horses ride by. And Janet, those are the mortals she has captured. You will know me only because I will wear only one white glove. My other hand will be bare. And when you see me, Janet, you must grab me and pull me down and hold on as tightly as you can. Because, Janet, the fairy queen will not let me go without a fight. And Janet nodded, resolute. Well, they held each other. They kissed. They wept. Tamlin put his hands on the soft roundness of her belly. And then near dawn, he was gone, just as the mist lifted. Time passed, days and weeks, and then it was Halloween night. And Janet snuck down to the side of the river, and she hid herself behind the roses, and she waited. There in the distance, she heard the church bell tolling out 10 and 11, and then midnight itself. And as the bell rang its last, she heard the clip-clop of horses' hooves. She watched as riders on enormous black horses rode by. She had never seen such big horses before. Their eyes glowed red. Their hooves, when they hit the soft ground of the riverbank, they rang out as if they were walking on metal. And the people riding were dressed all in black. They were so beautiful. And the fairy queen was the most beautiful of all, tall and elegant and as cold as ice. Janet hid and watched as the riders in black rode by. A few moments later, riders in brown on brown horses. These horses were closer to the size of horses people might ride, but more like draft horses than riding horses. All brown, their flanks and their manes and their tails, and the riders too dressed all in brown. Their posture was a bit more relaxed than that of the fairy queen and her retinue, but still they were tall and arrogant and noble. And she waited till they were gone. And then a moment or two later, the riders in white horses, the size of horses in her father's stables, with men dressed all in white atop them. She couldn't tell one from the other. They all looked just the same. But then she looked down and saw one rider who was wearing only one glove. And she knew that it was her Tamlin. She took a great breath, and just as that rider was about to pass her, she rushed out from the rose bushes. She grabbed him and pulled him down and held on. The horse whinnied and bucked, and all of the other horses stopped stamping and whinnying. And then the black horse bearing the queen came back. She looked down and said, "Who are you, mortal, to steal one of mine?" And she waved her hand. Tamlin turned into a great snake, hissing and biting and coiling himself around her and growing tighter and tighter. But Janet didn't let go. And then the queen waved her hand again. And now he was an enormous bear, so big she couldn't get her arms around him. So she clutched into her fur as he roared and clawed at her and bit down at her. But still Janet held on. And the queen waved her hand one more time. And now Tamlin was a rod of burning iron. She could feel her skin starting to burn. She could smell the smell of her own hair. And she ran to the river and threw him into the water. And with a hiss, he turned back into his own self again, as naked as the day he was born. The wounds on Janet's body disappeared, and the queen looked down and said, "Well, you may have him, mortal, but take care you do not cross my path again." And away rode the riders in black and brown and white. Tamlin shuddered and shivered in the cold water. Janet ran to him and wrapped her green cloak around him and pulled him up and held him until the shaking stopped. And whether the tears on her cheeks were hers or his, I do not know. The babe was born. They loved one another. The child was a delight, and the next, and the next. And never again did Janet go down to pluck roses by the banks of the Cotter Haw. I love that story. Isn't that a fun one?
That is wonderful.
Yeah. Yep. The original song is really, really powerful, and there are lots of interesting little bits of culture in there that I just think are great. Like she's wearing a green cloak, and green was considered at the time that this song became popular, a color that loose women would wear because the grass stains wouldn't show from when they lay their cloak down
Oh,
on the ground.
goodness.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I love Janet. I just think she's amazing. She held on. She knew what she wanted, and she held on, which is sometimes what we have to do with people we love, right? Well, apparently, the 7th day after the full moon, if you look up at the moon, you will see your true love, and then you'll look around, and the first person you see, you will fall in love with at first sight. So be careful that 7th night after the full moon. And you know the bit about weddings where the bride throws the bouquet and all the single women try and catch it. Well, I love where this comes from. Apparently, it used to be that you didn't catch the bouquet, but instead, after the wedding, single women would rush the bride and try and tear off a little bit of her dress because that would be a good luck token that would help them find a husband. And apparently the tradition of throwing the bouquet happened when brides who didn't want to have their dress torn would chuck the bouquet at the crowd to try and distract them so they could run and get away.
Okay, that I appreciate because it's such a distraction. It's just chuck, just run.
Also, like, what bride wants their dress torn up on their wedding day?
That's right. Yeah. There's another great tradition that on young women who want to know if they'll be pregnant in the coming year, virgins who want to know if they'll be pregnant, which means will they be married, in Germany, should go to the chicken coop on Christmas Eve and knock. And if the first sound that they hear is the hen, they're not going to have any luck that year. But if the first sound that they hear is the rooster crowing, then they'll be married by year's end, married and pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to the moon because I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
You said 7 days after the full moon, then do I have to look at the full moon and then look around to see the first person, or is it just that I look around 7 days after the full moon and that I will happen upon the first person?
So I have two answers for you. One is I think superstitions are a little vague on the details often. So I might say that you should do it the way that's easiest for you. I would suggest make sure that the person that you want to be your true love is nearby, because it's whoever you see first that's going to be your true love. So I think you kind of have to set it up just a little bit. So you look at the moon, and then you don't want to see, I don't know, your childhood bully whom you still don't like as the first person you see, because, then they'd be your true love, and that could be a little bit problematic.
Well,
so I think a lot of these need help.
Well, Andrew Garfield, wherever you are, please let me know where you will be 7 days after the next full moon.
And stay tuned for Laura's next book, How to Manipulate a Superstition.
There you go. Yeah. So, another one is you're not supposed to let anyone sweep your feet, like actually run a broom over your feet. 1, because it hurts, but 2, because it will sweep away your love. It sweeps love away. So don't.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard that similarly with when you move into a new house, don't sweep away, and like you blow cinnamon and then you don't blow it away because it'll blow away good luck.
Yeah, you're supposed to actually, in my knowledge of the superstition, and these are different everywhere, right? And they're all valid. You're supposed to take some cinnamon and blow it into the front door of your house on the 1st of every month, or when you get a new house, and that will bring good luck and prosperity. And don't sweep it out, because you don't want to sweep out the good luck.
And your floor might taste good after that.
Yeah, that's right. So if you need to lick your floors, there you go. Sandra, I'm glad you've heard that one. I'm glad I'm not doing that. Yeah.
Not recommended, but yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
back to this bridal bouquet for a second. I've been at weddings where the superstition was whoever caught the bouquet and whoever caught the garter, those two would be,
Yep.
married, I
Yep.
guess, next. Or whoever caught the bouquet, the next person she looked at would be,
Oh.
which is very limiting if, like, because you don't have any control over the guest list
No, you don't.
if you're just a bridesmaid. Or like whoever, like the groomsman catching the garter, like the next
Yep.
person he looks at.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not entirely fair
Yep.
to everybody else out there.
Yeah. Yeah. When one of my best friends got married, when I was just starting to date Charlie, to whom I'm now married, when she got married, she and it was time to throw the bouquet. She looked over her shoulder so she could see where I was. She started to toss it this way and then turned around and wailed it at me. And it whacked me in the face and I almost fell down. But I did end up marrying him, so maybe it worked.
Oh, there you go.
Yep,
Yeah, I always thought like embedding a softball into your bouquet was a good idea.
that's right. She would. She would. Kaz, I like do not clean on New Year's or you'll be cleaning all good luck away. That's a good one to do.
Oh.
Another good love one, if we're talking about weddings, is the wedding cake. You're supposed to take a slice of cake. Every guest gets a slice of cake, and you put it under your pillow and you sleep on it, and you'll dream of your true love. Honestly, I think that's really messy, but I remember that. I've been at weddings where I've been given a slice of cake, and all the single women are told to put it under their pillow.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, it seems like a waste of good cake.
Oh, especially like if you. I'm sorry, Trey.
No, I was just agreeing. No, that's what. Go ahead.
No, I'm just listening.
You want another story?
If you get married, then if someone gets married on like the day before New Year's, and you can't clean on New Year's because you'll clean away the good luck, then you can't clean that cake out from behind under your pillow.
Yep. Yeah.
Or the cinnamon off your floor.
Yeah.
So just don't do anything at the end of the year.
Mm-mm.
Just don't.
So since we're talking about marriage, I have two Nasruddin stories about marriage. Nasruddin is a trickster figure from the Middle East area, and far Eastern Europe, like Bulgaria, places like that. Nasruddin is a holy fool, so he's simultaneously very wise and very foolish. And some stories he's an utter idiot, some stories he's brilliant, but you never quite know what it's going to be. And these stories are teaching tales. So I have two little Nasruddin stories for you.
Okay. Can you spell that name for me?
Well, it depends on where you look, but Nasruddin, I think.
Okay.
Some people say Nasruddin, but it's Nasruddin.
I think I've seen it then.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
did.
And
I just
you
wanted
have absolutely heard Nasruddin's stories, but you didn't know that you were hearing them. The second one that I'm going to tell you might be a little familiar.
Okay.
Kaz, you had a horse walk you down the aisle? I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Good job. Yeah.
Kaz in the chat said she had a horse walk her down the aisle and she didn't have a bouquet or a garter. And both her and her husband don't like cake, so we ate cheesecake instead.
I love that.
Valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nasruddin had been away from his village for many, many weeks. And when he finally came home, his cousin came up to him and said, Nasruddin, where have you been? We've been so worried about you. And he said, I have been off in search of a perfect wife. Oh, said the cousin, what constitutes a perfect wife? Well, she must be a person of good spirit. She must have deep faith. And the cousin said, yes, of course. She must be a good housekeeper. She must be able to take care of my home for me and take care of me as well. And remember, these are old stories, so forgive a little bit of chauvinism there. And the cousin said, well, yes, that makes perfect sense. And she would not hurt if she is quite lovely. She should be at least not unattractive. Oh, yes, of course, said the cousin. So I went looking for a perfect bride. And first, I found a woman who was a woman of great spirit, but her home, it looked as if animals had been trampling in it, so I couldn't marry her. I found another woman who had an impeccable home, but she would have been difficult to wake up to every morning, and she didn't seem particularly interested in me anyway. And then I found a third woman who was as beautiful as could be, but I don't know if she'd ever had a thought of her own, and she certainly had never made her way to study anything of faith. I see, said the cousin. Well, what happened? Well, said Nasruddin, I looked and I looked and I looked, and I found some women who had two qualities, but not the third. And finally, after great searching, I found a woman who was very pious, a woman of good heart and good faith, who understood that faith must be central to our life together in her home and her cooking. Her home was impeccable, and she could cook the most delicious foods, and she was lovely to look upon. Well, why didn't you marry her? Said the cousin. As it turned out, she was looking for a perfect husband. So a lot of Nasruddin's stories you have to think about a little bit, but I really like that one. But apparently Nasruddin eventually did find a spouse. In fact, he found two. He was married to two women, which was not uncommon in his culture. He had his first wife, who was about the same age he was, which was not young. And then he had a new wife, a young wife, who was young and beautiful. And the two women didn't always get along well, though they did their best. And Nasruddin went to the cafe, and there was his cousin. And his cousin said, Nasruddin, what's wrong with you? Have you been ill? And Nasruddin said, no. Well, what happened to all of your hair? Said the cousin. The last time I saw you a few weeks ago, your hair was beautiful and thick and black, on some black hairs and some white hairs, but you looked like a man of good health and of great wisdom, because your hair was going gray but was not entirely gray yet, so you were still strong. What happened to all of your hair? It's gone. You are completely bald now. And Nasruddin sighed, and he rubbed his hand across his shiny, bald head. Never marry, he said to his cousin. What does that have to do with you being bald, Nasruddin? Well, you see, he said, my first wife, the one who is of an age with me, she and my second wife, the young one, don't always get along so well. And my first wife, well, she said to me that she loved that I was going gray, because it reminded her of all the years we had spent together and all of the fine times that we had had, and of how I have grown into considerable wisdom. What I didn't realize was that at night she was plucking out my black hairs that still remained. And about a week later, my young wife, she said to me that she loved my hair and she loved my black hairs, because it told her how vigorous and strong I was, and that she needn't worry that I would die and leave her anytime soon. And I agreed with her too, and little did I know that at night she was plucking out the white hairs. And so you see, I have no hair left. And so it is that people want us to be who they want us to be. And perhaps having two wives makes that just a little bit more complicated. Second story I actually grew up with. That was a joke that my parents would tell, that my father would tell. Excuse me. And it was only years later, and it wasn't Nasruddin, it was just some guy. It was years later that I actually figured out it was a Nasruddin story. So,
How funny.
yeah.
I just imagine from like the hours of, I don't know, 10 to 12, you have one wife that is just sitting there plucking out the hairs, and she goes, okay, that's enough for tonight. Good night. And then the other wife sneaks in, and it's just like, pop, 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 pop.
That's what I always imagined too. Yeah.
I want to know how you sleep through that at all.
Yeah. Deep, I don't know. Kaz mentions that pie is awesome, and I actually think pie is, in the chat, Kaz said that pie is awesome. And I actually think pie is pretty awesome too. So, yeah.
It's a little superior to cake, in my opinion, too.
Depends on the cake. There's some really good cakes. but
Mhm.
I think it really depends. So you know he loves me, she loves me, she loves me not game with flowers where
Oh yeah.
you pluck
Yeah.
the petals, and with
Mhm.
each petal, daisies it usually is, I think, that you pluck a petal and you say, you know, she loves me not, she loves me not. And when you pluck out that last petal, it
Hmm.
tells you if that person loves you or not. Well, that game actually dates back to like the 1600s. It's very old. And when I was a little girl, I had a crush on a boy named Jonathan, um, who is now we're back in touch because of Facebook. I was like 6 years old when I
Oh.
had a crush on him, but I'm
Oh.
not going to tell you his last name. Um, and I remember sitting down doing he loves me not" with him,
Hmm.
about him. Only the only flowers that I had available to me were dandelions.
Oh.
And it took me so long. And by the end, I realized that I could pull out 2 or 3 at a time, and I kinda gamed it. So he ended up loving me. Whether or not he really did, I don't know. But, yeah, he loves me not. And another really fun piece of folklore in general is the language of flowers, that the
Mm.
bouquet that you were given may in fact have a very detailed message. I don't know many of them right now, but I love the language of flowers. And there's symbolism of animals as well. Animals that are thought to mate for life, whether or not they really do, are often symbols of love, like doves and swans and animals like that. So that's another little bit of love folklore, and it's supposed to be good luck if you see a pair of swans while you are with the person you're courting, and it means that you'll marry and be married forever.
Especially if their necks make a heart.
That's right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep, the heart thing. Uh, would you like one more story?
I'd love
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Um, this story that I'm going to share with you is original. It's one that I created, and I created it because I was a little bit tired of folk tales and fairy tales always being about beautiful girls. And so I thought, what if it was a little bit different? What if there was something that was a little different? Oh, before I tell you, because in the chat there's a conversation about favorite pies, I have to tell you a family story about pie that's a love story.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
my mother's mother was an exceptional baker, and she would bake pound cake and pies and all kinds of things and sell them to local restaurants that they could serve it as so they could serve it as dessert. This was a long time ago when the health code was different. Well, my uncle Eddie, who was her eldest child, he served in World War II, and he was overseas and homesick. He met this fellow who also served, who served in the same unit, and they got to talking about home. And it turned out that they were both from the same city, Philadelphia, and they even were from the same neighborhood. And so they were talking about all their favorite things in this neighborhood. And this guy said, "Hey, have you ever been to thus and so dinette? They have the best apple pie you've ever had. It's apple pie like your mom would make." And my uncle Eddie said, "Well, my mother does make it." So these because it was one of the places that his mother sold pie to. So they ended up when they went home, they opened up another dinette, a little diner that served breakfast and lunch. And my grandmother supplied all the baked goods for it. And Eddie would be there early in the morning doing all the work, and he would stay there for the whole shift from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And every shift at about 1 o'clock, this young woman with jet black hair and a very substantial bosom would come into the dinette. And she would also always ask for a piece of pie, whatever the pie of the day was, and a cup of coffee. And Eddie certainly noticed her, but he didn't say anything because he was a rather shy fellow. Um, and she started staying till closing, which was very annoying to him because he needed to clean the store up, even though she was really nice to look at. Um, and finally, one day, as he was mopping the floor and she lifted up her feet so he wouldn't mop over her feet, which would be good because then all the love would go away, she looked at him and she said, "So when are you going to ask me out?" And so he did. And they got married and they had 4 children, and they were together for something like 60 years, my Uncle Eddie and my Aunt Evie. Um, and they met because of my grandmother's pie. So I love that. Since in the chat there's all this conversation about pie, I thought I would share that one with you.
Pie is powerful.
Pie is powerful. Absolutely.
Hashtag pie is powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm going to share one more story with you.
Okay.
And I hope you like this one. Once upon a time, there was a farmer who was very poor, because in fairy tales, farmers are always poor. And he lived far out at the edge of the village. Now, this farmer worked hard on his farm, and he had a daughter whom he adored. Every year on her birthday, he would wake her up and he would say, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. You are smart, you're funny, you're kind, you're good at solving problems. I love you so much." And every year on her birthday, the girl would thank her father and tell her that she loved him too. But inside, there would be a little twinge, because he never told her that she was beautiful. And truth to tell, she wasn't beautiful. At best, she was plain, but really, she was kind of homely. But she was smart and funny and kind and good at solving problems, and she did the best she could. Well, on her 18th birthday, her father woke her up and he said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I am so proud of you. I'm so glad that you're my daughter. You're smart, you're funny, you're kind, you're good at solving problems. I love you so much." And she felt that little twinge inside. But she thanked her father, and then he said, "I have a present for you." "A present? Dad, we can't afford presents." "No, no, 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 no," he replied. "Come with me." And so she followed him down the stairs, across the hall, out the door, across the yard, around the corner, and into the barn. And there in the barn was a mule. The girl looked at the mule looked at her, and her father said, "Happy birthday, honey." "Well, thanks, Dad, but a mule?" "Oh, come on," he said. "A mule is a great gift. You are so smart that I know you're going to get out of this town, and who knows what you can do with a mule. You can do all kinds of things with a mule, so happy birthday." And she thanked him, and they went inside and had breakfast and did all the things they did over the course of a day. That night, she was lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling with those same cracks she'd been looking at every night of her life, and she got to thinking. Remember, I told you this girl was smart. She'd been around the fairy tale block a few times. She had read all the stories, and she began to think, a mule, the mule must be enchanted. So she got up. She put on her slippers. She put on a robe. She went downstairs, across the hall, out the door, across the yard, around the corner, and into the barn, and there was the mule. She looked at the mule. The mule looked at her. And then she screwed up all of her courage and screwed her eyes shut and went and kissed the mule. Nothing happened. And she thought, well, I'm glad it was only a mule that saw me make a fool of myself. And she went back inside and went back to bed. The next morning, over breakfast, her father said to her, "Honey, I've gathered some wood in the forest. Would you mind taking it to market and selling it?" Now, truthfully, she hated going to the market in the village, because whenever she went, all the pretty girls, they looked at her and they went, and the boys, they would throw little stones at her and they would say, "Ugly, ugly." She hated going to the market, but she knew it would help her father, so she agreed. And then her dad said, "I've got it. You can tie the wood to the mule. You can ride the mule. See, I told you, a mule is a great gift." And she couldn't argue. So after breakfast, she went out and she tied the wood to the mule, and then she hopped up onto the mule. She didn't know it, but the mule was enchanted. No longer was she at best plain. Now she was beautiful, but she didn't know. She rode into town, and when she got there, everyone looked and went, "Oh," because they had never seen such a beautiful young woman before. The boys, they picked flowers and they ran to her, trying to get her to take their bouquet. She thought everyone was making fun of her in a new way. She rode the mule around the back of the little shack where she sold things from her with her father. She hopped off the mule and became her own plain self again. She untied the wood, sold the wood, and then went home. And as she rode out on the back of the mule, everyone went, "Oh," as she rode by because she was so exquisite. Now, I realize this is going to seem like a really big coincidence, but it's a fairy tale. Coincidences happen in fairy tales. It just so happened that that day, the prince of the kingdom was in that village.
Of course.
He was a good prince. Yeah, it isn't. I know it's a big coincidence. He was a good prince. He went from village to village to catch up on the gossip and the news and to find out how people were doing. And when he got there, all anyone could talk about was the beautiful girl who rode the mule. Well, he was a handsome prince on a beautiful white horse, so he, of course, was intrigued. He asked if anyone knew who she was, and they all said no, they had no idea who she was. But she rode down the road in the direction of that poor farmer's house, you know, the one with the ugly daughter. Maybe they would know something about her. And so the prince rode to the farmer's house. He knocked on the door. The girl opened the door and looked up. There was a handsome prince on a beautiful white horse. And he looked down. This was not a beautiful girl. Excuse me, he said. I was wondering if you would know anything about the beautiful girl who rides a mule. She was said to come this way. The girl looked up at the handsome prince and said, no. The prince said, do you maybe have a beautiful friend? No. Beautiful sister? No. But remember, I told you she was smart? She knew she was the only person who rode a mule. So then she said, I do have a beautiful cousin. Come back here in the morning and I'll see if I can get her here to meet you. And the prince was delighted. So off he rode to spend the night someplace and do princely things. The girl went up to her room. She picked up a hand mirror and looked at herself. It was the same old plain face she'd seen every day of her life. And then she went downstairs, across the hall, out the door, across the yard, around the corner, and into the barn. And she hopped up on the mule and she looked at herself again. Oh! The mule was enchanted. She was beautiful. And so the next morning she got up extra early. She brushed her teeth. She washed her face. She brushed her hair. She put on her best dress. She ran downstairs, across the hall, out the door, across the yard, around the corner, and into the barn, and hopped up on the mule. She rode the mule to the front of the house just moments before the handsome prince on his beautiful white horse rode up and saw her. His face lit up, and he asked if they could go riding. They rode through the village and everyone stared as they went by because they'd never seen such a beautiful couple before. And at the end of the ride, he asked if perhaps he could come calling again the next day, and she agreed. The next day, they rode through the fields, and as they rode, they talked back and forth, and he told her what it was like to be a prince. He told her about all the troubles he had, and she came up with some really good ideas to solve those problems. And then he asked if he could call again the next day, and she agreed. And then they went riding through the forest the next day, and he realized that he'd never laughed so much with someone. She was really funny. And by the end of the ride, he couldn't help himself, and because it's a fairy tale, it makes sense. So he said, not only are you the most beautiful woman I've ever met, but you're smart, you're funny, you're kind, you're good at solving problems. I have fallen madly in love with you. Please, will you be my bride? Now remember, she was smart. So she said, yes, but on one condition. You saw me first when I was on my mule, and I want you to always remember the magic of that moment long into our marriage. So I will marry you, but I will only spend time with you when you are on your horse and I am on my mule. And the prince was so besotted that he agreed. Well, her father came out. They told him the good news. He was delighted. And the next day, off the prince and the young woman rode to be married. They rode through the fields and the forest, past villages and hamlets, and they finally came to the main city, to the capital city. They rode through the square and rode up the stairs of the church and rode down the aisle of the church. They rode up to the altar, he on his horse, she on her mule, and there they said their vows and were wed. They rode back out of the church, down the aisle, down the stairs, across the square, and up the stairs into the palace, where they rode into the main hall and had a fabulous wedding feast with all the people that could come in attendance. The people were so happy because their handsome, kind prince had met a woman who was as beautiful as he was handsome and as smart as he was kind. He on his horse, she on her mule. Everyone was delighted. Now, I know you're wondering about this, so I'll tell you what happened. Towards the end of the meal, she said to him, husband, darling, marriage is new to me, so I am going to retire to our bridal chamber a little early, and you can come up after me. Is that all right? And he agreed. And so she gave her thanks to everyone and then rode out of the main hall on her mule, up the stairs, back and forth and down the hall until she was outside the door of the bridal chamber. She looked around. No one was there. She hopped down off her mule, went inside, closed the curtains, and blew out the candles. They had a lovely night, which led to a lovely day and another lovely night, and their marriage was joyful. Every morning she would rise very early and go down to the stables and hop on her mule. So by the time her husband found her, he on his beautiful white horse, she was as she was. And every night she would retire a little early and blow out the candles and close the curtains. They were as happy together as a couple has ever been. After about 6 weeks, she was up very early one morning riding through the castle gardens. She was riding in the rose garden because she loved roses. And she saw little scrubby tea rose bushes. Now, if you don't know this, tea roses are incredibly fragrant and they are very small. They grow on bushes that are low and close to the ground. And so from her mule, she wanted to smell those roses. She reached down to try and get them, but seated on the mule, she couldn't reach. So she looked around. No one was there. She hopped down off her mule, picked some of the roses, and she was so entranced by the fragrance that she didn't hear her husband's horse riding up behind her. And there the handsome prince on his beautiful white horse looked down. There was his wife's mule. And there was a woman wearing his wife's dress, but she looked nothing like his beautiful wife. "Who are you?" he said. "What have you done with my wife? Why are you wearing her dress?" And her eyes snapped open. And remember, I told you she was smart. She said, your wife, she's over there." And she pointed over his shoulder. He turned to look. And as he was turned, she hopped back up onto her mule. When he turned back, there was his beautiful wife, riding her mule, clutching the same flowers that the homely woman was wearing and wearing the same dress. And the prince paused, then said, "Wait a minute. Wait just a doggone minute. Was that you a moment ago down on the ground? Only you looked, different?" She began to weep. "Yes," she said, "it was me. I'm so sorry I lied. I'm beautiful only when I'm on my mule. That's why I wanted our marriage to be me on my mule and you on your horse. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to deceive you. I love you so much." And she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She was so busy crying that she didn't notice the smile that began to spread across the prince's face. Finally, he said, I can get off of this gosh darn horse. He hopped down off his horse, and you know what? He was no longer a handsome prince. At best, he was plain, maybe even rather homely. She jumped down from her mule and they embraced. And from that moment on, they lived happily and honestly, if not beautifully, ever after.
I think I love that one the most.
I love that
That's
story.
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. It started as a Beauty and the Beast variant because of the roses, but then I just got increasingly annoyed at the idea that you can only live happily ever after if you're beautiful. So there you have it.
Very good.
Ah. Now, I do have to ask, because you brought up Beauty and the Beast. There is a novel that is called Beauty, and have you read it before?
I read it when I was still a child. I was reading Robin McKinley when I was very young, and um, I I love that book, and you know that heavily influenced the Disney Beauty and the Beast. Um, and I have a telling of Beauty and the Beast that is not appropriate for a love stories night. Um, but that too was influenced by Beauty. I love Beauty, the idea that she's smart and capable and figures things out. For those of you who are listening or watching, read some books by Robin McKinley. She was a great writer.
We read it in 8th grade,
Hmm.
um, and it was just trying to turn the story of Beauty and the Beast kind of on its head. Um, Different story, different time, different podcast, but highly recommend it.
Yeah, yeah. Kaz says, I think I've in the chat says, I think I've read too many Brother Grimm stories. And, you know, a lot of those have relatively happy endings. So it could be a lot worse. Some of them are pretty awful, though.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure our audience knows how to find you and also some of the other things you have to offer. You have some books, and tell us about the Story Seeds cards and stuff too.
Sure, I will. Thank you. So you can find me at laurapacker.com, or you can find me at patreon.com/laurapacker. If you like what I do, a lot of my posts on Patreon are free, but for as little as $3 a month, you get extra stuff. And Patreon is my only consistent income. So if you really like what I do, support me there so I can keep doing it. I'm the author of From Audience to Zeal. This says sample because it's my sample copy, which is a book of about 80 short essays on many, many, many different storytelling topics, including love stories. So in my love story essay, uh, it has a bunch of points to consider when telling love stories, and mostly it's about really enjoying it. And at the end, I say, as storytellers, we are the ambassadors of human experience, regardless of the kinds of stories we tell, but especially stories of basic experiences like love. We offer our listeners a chance to feel less alone, more connected, and more alive. We heal ourselves and others by telling love stories and offering the hope that we too will be loved, which is why I love sharing them. So that's my book, From Audience to Zeal. You can find it at any of your book resources. And then I also have Story Seeds cards right there, which is a deck of story prompt cards that some are serious, some are silly, some are personal, some are creative. So here are two examples. This one says, who are you in the dark? Do you change the darker it gets? Don't we all? And the other one is this one that says, welcome to the Library of Forgotten Books, next door to the Museum, of the Unwritten. So they're little prompts to try and get you thinking about stories. I also have a Halloween deck that's specifically for Halloween, and I'm working on a fairy tale deck and a horror deck and a kids deck. So you can find those on Etsy at etsy.com/shop/storylara. And mostly, I hope you'll just find me, sign up for my mailing list on my website, and let me share stuff about stories with you, just like I've shared stuff here. And I'm always so happy to be here with you too. You are just such lovely, thoughtful people.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
This has been delightful.
Yeah. Thank you all.
I do highly recommend the story seeds. I've actually purchased them, and not only for myself, but also for a gift for some other people. So I do highly recommend them. They are very helpful.
Thank you, Trey.
You're welcome. As we close this episode out, we want to thank you so much for tuning in. You can also find us on Patreon under the Mod Rom. And then you can subscribe for more behind the scenes content that you cannot find anywhere else. So thanks for tuning in, and go tell some stories.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.